We heard your sincerity in that statement.
You know, I've been working on that for 20 years, so.
So Kathy, go ahead and start the recording, please.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon, group. Long time no see. Welcome back. I'd like to call to order the Homeless Strategies Workgroup meeting for April 16th, 2021. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome back Councilmember Hannah Stone. She is filling the vacancy that Gene Knutson left. And welcome, Hannah. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much, Barry. Glad to be here.
So why don't we go ahead and call the roll?
Barry Buchanan.
Here.
Tyler Schroeder.
Here.
Red Brown. Michael Lilliquist.
Here.
Hannah Stone.
Here.
Seth Fleetwood.
Seth has got a conflict, schedule conflict.
Riley Sweeney.
Here.
Michael Shepard.
Present.
Hans Erkinger Davis.
Here.
Mike Parker. Sorry, Terry Bryant for Mike Parker.
Here.
Nick Lewis. Ann Beck.
Here.
Karen Burke. Jason McGill.
Here.
I see we have Dave Crass for Flo Simon.
Here.
Thank you. Doug Chadwick. Mike Hilly. Guy Ochogrosso. Marcus Stidham.
I'm right here.
Joel Kennedy is, sorry, not on our list. Emily O'Connor.
Here.
Michael Barris.
Here.
Lisa Marks. That's everyone.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. All right, let's go ahead and dig right into, let's look at the meeting summary for March 5th, 2021. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I would move to approve.
Second.
Michael Lilliquist moves, Michael Barris seconds. Any discussion or corrections to those minutes? I realize some of you weren't here, but that's okay. You can abstain if you wish. Seeing none, all those in favor of the minutes signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'll abstain since I wasn't here.
Okay, Councilmember Stone abstains. Let's get right into review of shelter inventory and our data. So from the health department, Ann Deacon, could you lead us through this?
Sure. So at the last meeting, city and county staff agreed to work together to put together a comprehensive needs assessment to the extent we can with what data we currently have. And with that, also make some recommendations for this committee to consider giving to the county council. And the overarching purpose was really so that we have a collective understanding of what we are doing and why. So with that, the first part of a needs assessment is to do our best to figure out what resources currently exist. Thus, sent to you earlier this week was a shelter interim housing inventory of all the different shelters that we are aware of. There is one correction on it in that the Lighthouse Mission Base Camp, now that they have their furniture beds with the lockable storage for each guest, they are now able to increase their census up to 200. So 10 more than this particular document says. And so this is a very comprehensive document. I don't know, Kathy, did you want to share that or would you like me to share it?
Either way, I can give you screen share permission. if
Okay.
you'd like.
That will work. And I just want to show how we made the decision to categorize this. So can people see this screen? Great. So obviously we were looking at the provider agency. So I'm really going across the headings, and some providers have more than one program. So thus we also broke it out by program. Tried to give a brief description of what kind of shelter it is, and then nightly units or beds available. And one of the other things, well, and then the population served, but this other one, drop-in or scheduled admission, that's really important. So we have a number of specialty shelters focused on particular populations that are much more effective when you've got scheduled admissions, referrals, support services lined up and in place. And so that's why we also added this column, just so you had a sense of which shelters were night by night, meaning they could be drop-in centers, quick access, versus those that have a high focus on a specialty population. And then obviously where are these various shelters located? And then also we certainly talk about funding, knowing that local governments aren't going to be able to provide everything needed. We wanted to show what governments are contributing and investing in, and where there might be some private enterprises that are doing this work. So with that, rather than going through this in great detail, which I can certainly answer any questions, but are there thoughts or questions about this document right now?
Any questions?
At the very bottom.
Michael
oh,
Michael Barris.
Sorry, Michael, go ahead. And I unmute.
Whoever worked on this, I just really appreciate it. I know that it was a request from the last meeting, but it's helpful to see kind of a global view for those of us trying to understand things better. So thank you so much to whoever you are.
So that would, I'll call out Chris D'Onofrio from one of the housing specialists at the Whatcom County Health Department, Human Services. This is comprehensive and not maybe all inclusive. It's possible we missed something, but it does help when we as governments try to look at needs assessments. It's really critical to understand big picture. So as you said, Michael, getting a big picture is critical. If we don't know the big picture, then it's a little bit harder to identify the problems. And if you can't identify the problems, then you might be providing the wrong solutions, right? So this is always one of the first things we do when we're doing our needs assessments.
Marcus?
Good afternoon. I thank you. I'm curious as far as the needs assessment has gone. Has anybody gotten a count yet on how many people are banned from mission facilities? I'm wondering, maybe somebody here could answer that question. That's certainly a data point that we should all have by now.
So Marcus, the part of the needs assessment involves identified gaps and needs, and that question would be better addressed there. If we can kind of go through the process just to make sure we're sequential and everybody travels at the same
No,
pace.
that's fine. I thought you were kind of saying that this was like a statement of the gaps and needs, so I'll wait for that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
This is the resources available, inventory currently. Emily, you have a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I see the motel stays for families with kids on there, but maybe I'm missing it.
You are correct. So that, because that wasn't a 365 shelter, we didn't list it. So when you see this bottom page here, up to 516 beds available, it's actually 526, given that we have 10 more at base camp. We know that this last winter and even currently, we have anywhere between 60 and 80 families at any given night. And that would be added to this total in terms of actual shelter provided. And if you think it would be helpful, we could put that in here. It just varied from night to night. It wasn't a 20.
It would be helpful. And I guess I have a comment, Anne, which is I think that some are now 365 because they were funded with the new ESG and the requirement was that they had to be available. I see Terry nodding her head, so I think I'm on the right track. So some of those are permanent through the extent of the funding period. So, but I do think it would be helpful to not have that drop off this entirely.
And so some of those, in fact, were listed here, but I see that the ones that Lydia Place is providing are not listed here. So thanks for that reminder. Other thoughts, questions about the inventory?
Michael Lillquist.
Thank you. I don't know if this question belonged here or later, but it'd be nice to know which of these programs and to what extent these shelters are tied into the housing system. And maybe another way of asking that is, what is the turnover or throughput? I'm not trying to figure out how to describe it. Which of these programs are conduits that tend to serve the same clientele on a rotating basis, and which of these are effectively moving people into another housing situation, right? I mean, they probably do it to a different extent, each and every one of them, but that seems to be a critical factor. To what extent are these places for you to stay, and to what extent are these places where you begin to your exit from homelessness?
So that's an excellent question, Michael. Under this particular column labeled drop-in or scheduled admission, it does talk about, in part, the connection to the homeless housing system set up by the government, which is coordinated entry. And so to the extent that you see coordinated entry, that's a direct connection. Any shelter that the county supports has in their performance measures that people utilizing those shelters must be provided the services necessary to connect them to ongoing permanent housing.
Is it possible that a program which is not part of coordinated entry nonetheless kind of satisfies that goal? I see Northwest Youth Services aren't called out as part of coordinated entry. They're kind of their own, sui generis types of programs. But could we also characterize those as programs that are aimed at ending homelessness by transitioning them to a more permanent and stable housing situation?
Absolutely. I see Jason McGill here from Northwest Youth Services, but obviously that we have a number of contracts with them, and that is part of their performance measures, and they actively work at getting people permanently housed. There are other, really, there aren't any of these programs that don't assist in that area to some extent or another that I'm aware of. I do think some are more inclined to be maybe permanent resting places for people, which of course, at least from the county's point of view, that is never our goal. That shelter still means that somebody is categorized as homeless. And our goal is to solve homelessness and to get people from homelessness into housing.
Any other questions so far? Okay.
All right. So then the next part of our needs assessment was, okay, so now we know what we have. This kind of gives it, so we took a glance at this to see, are there some places where we're missing? And then we looked at, very briefly, the last point in time count relative compared to 2020. The point in time count, of course, is just a point in time. It's not the end all be all, but it certainly provides us some indication of trends, and it helps us in that regard. Plus the questionnaires help us also understand who is experiencing homelessness and what are their needs. And once a year, we put out a very comprehensive report, and we contract with the Opportunity Council to do that. And the 2021 report isn't out yet, but due soon. And you'll see that there are a couple categories that we use when we try to figure out what's the status of people living in homelessness. So for instance, somebody who is in transitional housing is not considered permanently housed, so we count them as homeless. There had access to food, plumbing, electricity, cooking, everything else, but we still classify them as homeless because they don't have their own permanent housing. So in this particular document, ES stands for emergency shelter. Transitional housing is what I just talked about. And then unsheltered is those people that were not in a bona fide shelter that night. So the night of the point in time count in 2020, if you recall, there were about 80 vacancies at base camp and the overflow winter shelter. And so obviously more people living unsheltered that night that were counted. And we had a modified count this year, although we had many more volunteers doing the count than we thought we would. Given the COVID pandemic, we were thinking it might be less, but it was fairly robust relative to our expectations. And thank you tremendously to the homeless outreach team and other volunteers who did this work. So you will see here, the red lettering is unsheltered. We look at households and then we look at individuals. So as you can imagine, sometimes there's more than one person in a household. In this case, in 2021, we counted 218 people currently unsheltered. Interestingly, 218 unsheltered in 2020. And this again makes us think if those 218, if 80 of them actually were using the shelters available that night, then are we looking at maybe 140 that were truly unsheltered that we counted? We know this isn't everyone, of course. And some people will not allow us to count them, and they obviously have that right. Go ahead, Michael. You had a question? Okay. And so down below is also just showing where people were staying, including motels. So again, this wasn't the only thing we used as data, but we were looking at it to help us understand trends. Was there a significant increase in concerns or homelessness? And then we started to create a document to explain what we've been learning from our data collection and started to identify shelter needs and gaps. And so there we go. Oh, right there. So we, again, categorize this, first of all, in just who is the population, or what is the issue that we're aware of and have identified, and then what supporting information do we have? Again, this is a summary sheet, obviously, but we wanted to try to give it to you in one page so that you could get the big picture all at once. Families with children, we've talked about that a lot in the Homeless Strategies Workgroup, and certainly in a number of our ongoing meetings that counties and cities have with our partners. We even have a special group of stakeholders that focus on families with children who are experiencing homelessness. And this winter was a surprise to us in terms of the steep increase of families with children that were without housing. And so at this point, we said somewhere between 65 and 85 families with children were residing in motels. And the problem, of course, is that that is not conducive to long-term well-being of the children. The second one, young adults, 18 to 24. They tend to be more vulnerable living unsheltered. We know through brain science that really the brain doesn't even fully develop in terms of its executive functioning until at least the mid-20s, and that there is a concern that they may be more vulnerable than others who are living unsheltered. Last year, there were approximately 20 young adults utilizing a shelter dedicated to their age group. The other consistent message we've been hearing is that there has been an increase in elderly women experiencing homelessness. Obviously, that is a population that tends to be more vulnerable as well. A fourth was people who are dementia, and that for us, we understood that, first of all, the hospital has noted that and brought to our attention that people who have been in the hospital for medical care no longer need that level of care, but they aren't feeling comfortable exiting them back out to homelessness because their condition isn't stable enough and they don't want to exacerbate their condition. So sometimes they stay longer than necessary simply because they're concerned about the future of their welfare. And so what we noticed is there's a need for a step-down facility to extend care at a lower level. And then in some of our interviews, and I will say that we've interviewed well over 50 different people, many hours of interview time to gather some of this information. So not only did we bring in the quantitative data, but some of this is reflecting that qualitative data that we gathered as well. Special populations at risk that we also have been brought to our attention on a regular basis is that some folks face a higher risk of harassment and potential harm and would benefit from shelter opportunities that promote safety and security. And I listed some of those here: the LGBTQ population, people of color, people who may have noticeable disabilities, that some of them have said they don't feel safe in a large shelter. And then, of course, we're all aware of number 6, small tent encampments. The homeless outreach team connects regularly with these different encampments, are probably the most familiar with where the encampments are located and who is living there. But obviously one of the issues there is that when people are camping in non-camp sites, that their access to waste removal, toilet facilities, et cetera, is either limited or non-existent. And I know the city has set up some porta potties in some places, but obviously there's some environmental concerns that have been noted for people living in these small encampments. And that is an issue. Tiny homes. The issue here is that there are some strict requirements from HUD and from Commerce in terms of what qualifies as shelter. And so I thought I'd list those here because we've talked a lot about tiny homes. And from a government standpoint, if staff are making recommendations to their elected officials, we're going to make sure that we make recommendations that meet, the standard requirements of potential funders like HUD and Commerce. So what is required for a tiny home or a tiny home village to really meet requirements and qualifications as a shelter? They, first of all, each living structure must be able to manage their climate, meaning heat, or an opening window or a fan. It has to be a semi-permanent structure, or there has to be a semi-permanent structure to prepare or eat food. When they learned that some of our tiny homes may have had tents, Commerce told us they barely qualify. They would allow us to qualify them as shelter, but barely. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we are planning tiny home villages. The living structure for residents must have 4 walls, a ceiling, and a door that closes. Some literature says it has to be lockable. They also must have reasonable access to sanitation facilities less than 100 yards away. So with the ability to shower, hot and cold running water, toilets, they, things like a shower trailer or other things, again, Commerce barely allowed us to call them shelters. So when we are planning villages, we need to put together a more permanent facility for that. And then electricity to each living unit. Marcus, I see your hand is up.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just kind of a point of clarification. You had mentioned earlier where some situations with indoor plumbing, toilets, et cetera, were still qualifying as transitional housing, and we're not kicked off of the housing list for that. I'm under the impression that, and maybe somebody here can answer, that the Opportunity Council will knock you off of, it's what I'm told, is that you'd be knocked off of the housing list if you should have flushing toilets, say at like Unity Village or Swift Haven. And that is the reasoning why they're using outhouses during this pandemic. Is that true?
I don't think I understood your question. I'm sorry.
I think that earlier, well, I think that earlier you were mentioning that in some transitional housing, that plumbing was okay to be there, flushing toilets, et cetera. Is that correct? And to be considered transitional.
No, transitional housing would look a lot like permanent housing, pretty much is permanent housing. It's just that people are limited to their stay. That's the difference between permanent and transitional housing. Is it would look just like an apartment, like a permanent living place. It's just that they are not allowed to stay there permanently. It has a limit to the stay.
And tiny homes would not qualify for that type of.
Correct.
Because people are on the housing list when they're in those apartments, right? And so I'm wondering, and I've been wondering, and I thought it was maybe a problem we should all try to tackle someday. So here it is. I just thought I'd ask about it for clarification.
So tiny homes are considered shelters, not transitional housing.
Okay.
And they're only considered shelters if they meet these qualifications. And so we've kind of been skirting it with our current tiny home villages. Commerce did allow us to classify them as shelters.
Okay, not to belabor the issue, I'm trying to clarify. It is my understanding that, say, Unity Village and Swift Haven, for instance, and I'm presuming that the Road to Home Lehigh project would be the same, that if they were to have flushing toilets available on site, that would disqualify them for the housing list for the Opportunity Council. Can I get some clarification there?
Oh, I hear what you're saying. No, anyone who is not in permanent housing and is at risk of homelessness, and people who are in sheltered are considered homeless. All of them are eligible on the housing interest pool.
It's weird because I think that it's been part of the negotiations with the city all throughout these tiny home encampments. Maybe I'm wrong, that the reason that we don't have flushing toilets is because it would disqualify. So if that is not true, then I really hope that the government will help these tiny home villages immediately get flushing toilets during this pandemic. It's awesome. That would be great.
A flushing toilet will not give them the status of housing.
Right. Good.
It gives them the status of a more qualified shelter.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah. For some reason, it seems that that was the breaking point, was because it would take people off the housing list, and you're saying that it's not. Okay. That's good to know. I don't know why that information's out there like that. Thank you.
I think we find in this world that misinformation runs rampant. So I'm thrilled to correct whenever the opportunity arises. Okay, and so as we move through this, one of the other things that we found, which is number 8 now, local governments may not be able to provide every type of shelter desired. There is then therefore a need sometimes to just identify humane responses to people living unsheltered who may not utilize shelter options that are available to them. That's not even considered shelter. It's really just, like I said, a humane response. We know that whatever shelter options are available, of which now we know there's, maybe up to 550 shelters available, not everyone wants. There are people who don't want to use some of them. I was asked earlier this week, what percentage of the people living unsheltered want nothing to do with any of the shelters offered. I know there's different articles out there about this, but I simply don't feel comfortable providing any kind of percentage. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anyone does. I don't know if we offered, if we went one by one for every person unsheltered and gave them everything they wanted, I still don't even know if they would accept it, depending. And I also know that the local governments just have limits to what they are able to provide. I also know that our governments aren't going to be providing locations or services that would maybe allow for ongoing criminal activity or harm to others or things like that that sometimes happen among the human population, not just those who are sheltered or unsheltered. So I put this here just because we do need to think about something other than shelters as well sometimes. Last winter, for instance, there was a warming shelter for a while that people, when the really cold weather hit, used that facility.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Is this where we put programs like safe storage or mobile shower trucks or facilities like that, urban rest stops?
I think that makes sense to me. So number 9, obviously last winter there was an underutilization of available shelters. At one point there were as many as 80 in a given night not utilized. I think the concern for us here, we know that part of that was just in response to a protest and not necessarily anything else. But we also know that there was a lot of misinformation being distributed about the shelter options available. And I do think that we need to do a better job in future winters to make sure that we quell the misinformation or the diversion away from safe shelters. We did have people last year who were very vulnerable, who were purposefully discouraged from using safe shelters. Later, their case managers found them harmed, traumatized, in very, very bad shape as a result of basically being assaulted in unmonitored camps where they previously were doing quite well and were stable at base camp. So for us, we really want to increase our focus on making sure that our most vulnerable people are not discouraged from using safe resources.
Marcus?
Yeah, just to stay with it here, is this the location where we would talk about trying to quantify people who are not allowed to take shelter at given shelters? Is this that spot?
I think that's it's a question. I think probably the mission has some sense of who on their list may not qualify for current admission, although my understanding, and Hans, I think I'll send it over to you, but my understanding is that you pretty much allow anyone to try to work their way back in.
That is the case. Everyone has a chance to get back in if they were exited for violence or things like that. I talked with staff earlier this week just asking that question. Just realistically, how many folks will have a really hard time getting back in to base camp? And they were able to count up 4 or 5 people that really wouldn't have a chance based on the level of violence they exhibit consistently, that wouldn't be able to get back into base camp.
Do you have a follow-up, Marcus?
Yeah, I kind of did. And also just to add to that, I think I met all 5 of them just the other day. So I must have got lucky. But because these are people who went to base camp and have not been allowed, and they tell me they are banned. So I'm just kind of curious what the total banned list looks like right now. You're saying there's 4 to 5 people. Okay.
I will say that sometimes there's a person maybe is exited for a period of time that is allowed back in.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm asking about.
Or that sort of thing.
I'm asking about currently, because like I know sometimes you can get banned for a month or you get banned for 3 months or 6 months or whatever that is, a year. I'm asking for the current banned list idea. This is what we're trying to do, is quantify these numbers, right? Who can't take advantage of that sheltering? So what else can we come up with?
Well, like I said, all those folks can access the shelter, but they might have periods of times where they can't come in as their, because they need to follow their recovery plan to get back into services. But they may not want to follow that recovery plan.
You're saying that currently, tonight, everybody, every homeless person who can qualify to come in there is except for 4 or 5 people can come into base camp tonight. Yeah.
Like I said, not necessarily all of them can come in right away.
I'm talking about that.
Yeah, but in terms of just coming in tonight, I couldn't tell you. I don't know what those numbers are, and they change. They ebb and flow.
We've been conducting sweeps and telling people that
Generally
they can go to base camp that night, and it's not working out. And that's why I'm trying to ask. I'm observing it. I'm right there with it. I'm helping those people currently. And as far as the misinformation stuff that we're hearing about, I can't. I'm glad to have you on the horn here, Hans. I'm not sure why we're not talking about the time period during the camp out that you locked the doors and didn't let people come in unless they spent the night before. I know that was on the record before, but now this is not part of the conversation. We're going to call that disinformation or not? I'd like to know.
I'm sorry.
Did you not have a period of time up to weeks where you had locked people out of base camp and told them if they could not come back in if they did not spend the night before?
Yes, there was a period of about a week and a half or so where
okay, and I'm just trying
couldn't come in because there was a lot of COVID at the encampment that was coming into our doors, and so we couldn't allow that.
One case at that time. Well, you had 2, I think, in your house, but that's okay. That's not what I'm trying. It's the misinformation stuff that I keep hearing about. So I just thought I'd go ahead and see if we could get this back to what was already on the record. And it's important because we're trying to count beds and trying to count availability for people who are out there. They're being advised by the hot team, by police officers to go to your facility. And I apparently am meeting all of them that can't. And that's a drag. So I'm hoping we can come to grips on who's currently unable to go, because if you're being told you can go there during a sweep, that's disingenuous.
So if I can interject here for just a moment, we would not be, county staff are not going to be recommending to our elected officials to set up some kind of special shelter for people who haven't been following the rules and are temporarily asked to step away from base camp until they work their way back in. I don't know that we would ever provide a shelter response for that.
Would there ever be an oversight?
Would there ever be recommend? Let me just say one other thing. We have case managers whose clients are telling them they're not allowed into base camp. Please get me a hotel or whatever. When they contact base camp says, nope, they're perfectly welcome. So again, I think we need to be careful when we hear from people that, we should double check to make sure that what they're telling us is true.
Let's move to Councilmember Lilliquist.
I'm going to tell a short story and then make it a question. So sometimes city will put in a sidewalk, and what we'll see is a worn grass mark where the people are actually walking, right? Because we put the sidewalk in the wrong place. It's kind of a general engineering principle, right? I wonder if our shelters are sometimes like that too. What we see is non-conformance, but it's kind of a failure of the provider, of the engineer at the front end. So I guess I could rephrase Marcus's question, because I think any facility should have the right to at least temporarily exclude people for the safety of those who stay. So the question is, can we have non-congregant alternatives that are like the sidewalk in the right place, that work for people so they don't end up getting banned temporarily? Because it wasn't a big open congregant facility where conflicts might arise. So I think the number of people that Hans and his crew asked to leave or stay away for a while, that's an important number to know, because it's kind of an indication of the worn grass, right? It's an indication of the people we're not quite serving. And it's not that these people shouldn't have been asked to leave because of misbehavior, but they still aren't being served. How big is that number? And could that number be near zero if we were offering alternatives where there wasn't as much chance for conflict and reason for people to be asked to leave. So I still think there's an unmet need there. I'm just not sure how to quantify or even characterize it.
I will say it's a challenge to quantify it, because some folks might show up, they might have been causing conflict because they're inebriated. We ask them to walk it off and then come back later that evening. And that person, they need the access to the service, is a good fit for their needs. Other folks might have more consistency in their misbehavior that causes serious problems. And it's like, you know what, this is going to be a rough fit for them. But at least for us, our aim is to get them back into services. And so our engagement is through our outreach out on the streets, where we're continuing to work with them and engage them and encourage them to do what they need to do to get back in. And that, at least for us, in our continuum, our internal continuum, works pretty well. And so even the folks that say, oh, I can't get back in, when our staff are out there, like, oh, you can get back in. We have access to the database on their cell phones. They know it's actually not as widespread as often reported, unfortunately.
Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on two things. One is, if a person is trespassed from a facility because of their behavior, the focus on all these conversations has been on the impact of the person trespassed. And what I think we need to remember is that there's an impact on the people that were being hurt by the trespass. So if you've got someone who goes to a shelter, a vulnerable person like the ones that Anne was talking about before, who is physically assaulted by someone who doesn't want to follow the rules, the conversation needs to be on the person who's being victimized. And if the person who's doing the victimization is not willing to modify their behavior, from a council perspective, my priority is on the victim. And that person who's engaging in violent behavior is going to need to address their own scenarios. And that's secondary to me, to the person who's being harassed, assaulted, raped, forced to see drug use when they're trying to get sober. That's the priority. So that's my first point. And the second point is, I just want to bring up one of the things that is disturbing to me in the way some of these conversations go is questions are asked, and they're good questions, but the person they're being asked of is not being given a time to respond. And I want to hear the response. I don't want to hear someone talking over at the same time they've asked them to respond.
Okay, I think we probably beat this one to death enough for now anyway. I think we need to keep going on Anne's presentation because there's a lot more to cover. So let's go ahead and keep rolling.
There's no way I can briefly
All
bring
right.
this along to what
So
we're
the
going
next
through.
one is number 10, which is methamphetamine use.
There's no way we can bring this
We
back
bring
around.
this in because
Marcus,
Meth-
I want to make, just a second, I want to make sure we get through all the material today. So if we could just keep going, that would be great. There'll be opportunities to drill down deeper on this stuff. So go ahead, Anne.
we wanted to put methamphetamine use as an issue here because this is one of our biggest challenges, our meaning local governments. It is difficult, and especially when the health department is the entity that is working with housing providers and shelter providers, we have an obligation to make sure that shelters are safe, healthy environments for people. And what we know is that when methamphetamine use, smoking occurs in units, it damages them, it contaminates them. And that contamination stays, and then the next person in that shelter can be impacted in terms of just health conditions. We also know that some symptoms of use include aggression, volatility, and that sometimes that alone is dangerous to others. So I have no answer here today. I just need us to be aware of this when we are planning, that we need to make sure that we maximize the safety of others, and that methamphetamine use does victimize many people. And Unfortunately, science has gotten really good at figuring out treatment regimens to address opiate addiction, even alcohol addiction. We do not have a good treatment response to methamphetamine use. Number 11, this is really more for elected officials to think about. Shelter availability in neighboring counties. Skagit County has certainly seen and received some extra grant funds for shelters, and they have made some increased shelter capacity available, but they do not have a night-by-night quick access shelter for residents similar to our base camp. And we regularly have people from other counties coming to Whatcom County to use our facilities. Obviously, we don't have walls and, borders that don't allow folks to come and go. All we want is to bring to the attention of the elected officials that we really want to make sure that Whatcom County isn't tasked with solving a regional issue, that we really want the region to solve its regional issues. And then finally, just to put a fine point on this, the point in time count, we had a lot of folks that didn't use current shelters, and that we did in fact have 171 more spots available in 2021. And that I want us not only to acknowledge the improvements we made, but also to know that even with 171 more spots, we still didn't have shelter for everyone. Not that everyone would have used it, just that we didn't. So work to be done there. So with the identified needs and gaps, looking at the resources, then we came up with some recommendations for this committee to consider in terms of what they might want to then in turn advise county council on. And did you want me to pull that one up, or did you want to do that, Kathy? There we go. So whenever we consider recommendations, we first of all make sure that we are very clear about the goals we're trying to achieve. And that's what you see in the colored boxes up here. First and foremost, because this committee advises county council, we thought, obviously, it's important to clarify the extent of local government support. Government isn't gonna be the answer to everything. And so what exactly can government do here? Or what are they willing to do, or what resources do they have? Second, and this was brought up again by Councilmember Brown, prioritize the most vulnerable populations. Because we don't have the resources to give every single unsheltered person what they want, hopefully we can give every unsheltered person what they need. And when we do, let us make sure we prioritize those most vulnerable to living unsheltered. Third, consider strategies and actions appropriate for local government to support, knowing that even in that inventory of resources, you'll see that there were some private entities providing shelter opportunities that probably were much better suited for them to provide rather than government providing them. And the fourth was, again, just part of government efficiency, build upon current resources where possible. Let's not duplicate, let's not create brand new programs if in fact we can do so more efficiently by building upon current resources. And then obviously for cities and counties, when we do our strategic planning, we really want to invest in long-term permanent solutions over temporary crisis solutions when resources are inadequate. And so with that, we then decided, let us break our recommendations into two categories. Short term is really now and certainly focused on next winter, so that we all understand exactly what we have available next winter. Whether or not we can do everything we want, at least we know what we can do. And then the second piece is long-term, and that's really more of a 1 to 3 year period, because some of these things will take facilities that aren't yet either built or operational. So I'll start with some of these short-term goals. Some of them obviously you've seen before, some are new. The first thing, sadly, not that I would throw up a cheer on this one, this is just really keeping people safe, which is provide motel stays for families with children. Until we can find a better shelter option and hopefully more permanent supportive housing for families with children, let us at least keep them sheltered. And so for us, this winter, we focused especially on the months December through February. We're recommending that we focus more resources from November through March and making sure that no child is living in a car or in a tent. And then with this, part of it too is research what COVID recovery monies may be available to support these steps. I think there's some talk in the state legislature. I don't know how close we'll get, but maybe there's more shelter money coming there. If so, this would be a top priority for us to recommend, which is let's get our most vulnerable, which are children, taken care of first and foremost. The second one obviously is establishing another winter overflow shelter. And this is simply just to ensure that the single people experiencing homelessness have a place to stay warm, dry, access to critical services, running water, toilets, etc., meals. And that, again, we thought last year, November 11th, 12th is when weather was unseasonably cold. And so we're recommending that we consider expanding the time for this overflow shelter again from November through March, so 2 more months. And the third is the severe weather shelter. We didn't use it last winter because there was never the need. The shelters remained vacant, shelter spots remained vacant. But hopefully next winter, people who need shelters will be using them. And if in fact the weather gets really bad, what we noticed in 2019 is that people used these severe weather shelters when they typically don't use any other shelter. But when the weather became very severe, they were happy to take us up on this offer. And we had a number of great organizations providing those services. So we would want to still always have that available to us every winter. This next one is really critical for the work we're going to be doing, I think, which is establish a formal data collection process to assist in ongoing analysis and planning. So it's not that we don't collect data, we do now. And the homeless outreach team is really helpful in some of this. But some of the questions even asked today is, let's really ask questions that we may not ask in a formal way. Let's have a central repository for the data, and then let's do some in-depth analysis of the data we are collecting. Some of the places in particular I think we should initially focus on, obviously families with children. Why was there such a huge increase? A surprise to all of us. And Whatcom County was not unique. Obviously, the COVID pandemic had an impact, but were there other issues? And so we've been doing some interviewing even now of families with children to find out what happened and what does that mean for planning in the future. And then the needs of individuals age 18 to 24. We talked about that in the needs, the identified needs and gaps, but what might we need to do? And in fact, if there weren't a lot of people using this shelter in previous years, again, we have to look at, does it make sense to create a whole nother one? Do we somehow pair up or partner some together to make sure there is designated safe place? Lots of things to be looking at. And then obviously the ground floor is a a day place for young adults? Is there, we want to make sure that whatever we do in terms of young adult shelter aligns with that program as well. And certainly we've been having some discussions with Jason McGill about some of the options that may be available. And then again, really the special populations that we know tend to be more vulnerable, the elders, people with very serious mental illness, LGBTQ, BIPOC. How do we make sure that we have the specialty shelters needed for people who simply cannot use some of the larger shelter options? As you saw, there are quite a few specialty shelters already, but we still have people who are unserved. I put here follow YWC efforts in process simply because they're expanding shelter services to women who are over 55. Sun House focuses on people with very serious mental illness. Again, there are many other options. And that we would recommend that we continue to support the homeless outreach team and review their qualitative data on the needs of the people they are serving, and to really begin, like I said, to have an ongoing central repository of data that many people have access to, so we can look to that and answer some of these questions more readily. And then as we go through this, obviously we want to continue to support those specialty shelters. That has been a godsend for us, for people who cannot use others and who need special supports. And then the support for the continuation of current tiny home villages, even though we barely met the grade of shelter for a couple of them, maybe there's something we could do there. Obviously, the city of Bellingham is in process of standing up one that will fully meet criteria as shelter. And that at this point, our recommendation for consideration is that we make no further investments in the number of taxpayer-supported tiny home encampments without in-depth research to ensure not only the need exists, but that the response is the best practice. And I want to explain why we put this here. Within the last 2 years, there was a huge priority and a direction to stand up a 200-bed shelter in our community that also had hygiene available, laundry services, etc. That was the #1 targeted priority. We achieved that. And I say we, that of course took a village. Significant, great thanks to the Lighthouse Mission in the city for their work on that. But that was the priority. And then last year we heard, no, wait, we don't want that anymore. Now we want tiny homes. And there was a lot of effort around tiny homes. Now we're also hearing from some people, no, forget large congregate shelters, forget tiny homes. Let's put everyone in hotels. So my point here is that there are trends in terms of how people respond and how communities respond to homelessness. And rather than just jump into what is the trend du jour, let us make sure that we're much more purposeful in the research we're doing, making sure that the responses we're creating actually are the proper response for the identified populations. And we know that because of the data that we're collecting, and that we really do our homework to be very purposeful in what we set up. And that when possible, and I know that Emily O'Connor's brought this up many times, let's be sure we don't overinvest in shelters to the detriment of the solution to homelessness, which is housing. This is still a continuum. It's still a balance. We have to make sure that we do not compromise our ability to create as much permanent housing for people as possible. And then finally, the last one here again, and I'm putting some pressure on our local elected officials, but really to work with Skagit in particular, but other counties in our region to really address this from a regional perspective. And please don't have Whatcom County solving a regional issue, because we can't, and we really need that help. So the next section is the long-term goals that we're recommending, and I'll turn that over to Tara unless there are some
Beg your
questions
pardon?
you want to entertain, Barry.
Let's go ahead and finish the presentation all the way to the end.
I
so
just have a question regarding that little bit there, Barry. This
Well,
isn't like a
well,
big
well,
thing.
you can come back to it, Marcus. I just want to get I think we're almost
I've got a
done.
lot of notes. I hope you give me time.
Go ahead, Ann, and finish up.
All
Or
right, I'm going
Tara's
to turn
gonna-
this one over to Tara, my comrade here, who's helped put all of this together.
Thanks, Anne. Before I dive into the long-term solutions, and again, these are long-term, but they're really short-term. They're 1 to 3 year, 4 year solutions. I did want to clarify that in this last winter, other than the shelter, the severe weather shelter that the city of Bellingham stood up, we didn't have any severe weather shelters because of COVID. So I just wanted to make that clarification. The county health department staff believes that coming next winter, we will have some operators that will come forward and say, yes, we'll do severe weather shelters. So I just wanted to clarify that for the record. Okay, well, Anne kind of ended with a comment I was going to start with, which was really to, in this community, we prioritize permanent solutions. And that's been the case with families with children. We don't want to put families with children in emergency solutions. And that's why we've opted for the motel stays, because they were intended to be very, very quick, very, very short-term stay. And even before COVID, we'd kind of come to the conclusion in our community that we were having trouble moving families out of motels as quickly as we needed to. The design of a motel room is not sufficient or adequate for families with children, and there are others on this call that could go into that in much more detail. But we think that that what we need to do is look for an alternative to motel stays. Right now, we're spending about $100,000 to $150,000 a month as a community on motel stays, and we want to look to find another solution that perhaps could not cost as much, but more importantly, serve the children and the parents that need that service. So what we're proposing is that we work with, and we've already got a meeting scheduled with Lydia Place and the Opportunity Council and the Health Department, and a foundation that is potentially interested in being a partner on this feasibility period. So we really need to look at kind of best practices in our state and elsewhere, look at the different models and options, look at really what the right size facility is. We clearly want to not overbuild a facility like this. We want to move those families into housing, and we really have ramped up resources this last few months to do so. So that is, we're identifying a pretty strong priority that we as our community need to focus here. The next category that we feel like is an important one is to focus on a facility that's dealing with the medically fragile. Whatcom County and Unity Care and Peace Health have been underway in scoping this one. This one's a lot further along actually than the families with children, but a facility that would serve medically fragile. And this is kind of a unique facility. They will also be exploring the co-location of some of those hygiene services that we've spoken about for those that choose or for whatever reason can't access or don't access shelters, that are living unsheltered, to have a place for them to seek showers and laundry services and other hygiene services. So that project's underway. And I will say, for a community this size, these are 3 very, very large projects to be pushing all at one time, but they are being pushed all at one time. And then finally, while maybe not every single person seeks the service of base camp, a lot of people do. And we've got about 150 people staying there. And I think we all realize it was a huge lift, but it is a 3 to 4 year solution. And so we don't want to forget that what the mission is trying to achieve in Old Town in a permanent facility is really important for our community as well. So again, these are long-term in the sense that they're not going to be up and operational by next winter, but in my opinion, fairly short-term in the sense that it's a 1 to kind of 3-year solution. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ann and Barry.
Thanks, Tara. Ann, do you have any final things before we go to questions?
No, I think I'll stop there for now. I have lots more to say, but I think it's time for discussion.
Okay, let's start with Councilmember Brown, and then we'll go to Marcus, and then Michael Barros. I thought I saw your hand up at one point. Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, Ms. Deegan, I love the idea of getting the other jurisdictions to step up. I don't know how to do it because inaction is in their favor. So I don't know if you've got any suggestions. And it's actually not just other counties. I mean, the reality is in different jurisdictions, some cities end up picking up the majority of the load, and other cities sort of say, well, we'll get round to that. And the longer we take to get round to it, the longer we don't have to invest or deal with that population. So I don't know if you've got any suggestions either here or offline.
I do think we have some leverage in the sense that there are monies coming from both the federal American Rescue Plan Act, as well as the state legislature is looking at more shelter dollars. I don't know if that bill will go through all the way, but I think if in fact there's more resources coming, it's a great time to talk, at least with Skagit, about encouraging a partnership with one of their private entities to consider something. It wouldn't be their own money. And again, that organization with support from their local government might be more apt to act.
Yeah, I'm just reluctant to build anything based on the American Rescue money because it's short term.
Right. Sometimes the initial capital is what stops folks. Obviously, operations will always be an issue too.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Marcus?
Great. Sorry, I will try to be brief about it, guys. Honestly, thanks, Michael, for the sidewalk analogy. That's actually pretty apt. I'm going back to Hans's comments about rules and how we're dealing with that. I guess I would ask if there's not a place where government has some oversight of those rules so that we can, I mean, if we can't even count or quantify the people who are not allowed to take shelter right now, then perhaps we shouldn't be presuming to do the sweeps, which have been happening. And there's been a lot that has been against COB or BPD policy for sure. I know, and I don't want to go into all of it, but I can tell you that it's verified with me plenty that they're going against their own procedure, and that's fine. It's not fine. But while we're doing those sweeps, the whole time we're telling people that they can go to base camp. And so we don't have a number quantified from base camp right now. And I'm asking for it. I think that we should try to have some oversight on that if we're going to dump a lot of government money on that and our faith in. They can do whatever they want, as has been talked about here. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about Rudd earlier talked about victims and who victims have rights, and I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of victims out there who won't go to mission services because they've been victimized there for all of the same reasons that Rudd listed, all of them. I'm sorry to say that. It just is. But again, how it relates to sweeps is really important. That's what we're going through. That's what we're going through right now. Our citizens are being massively displaced right now. They're thirsty, they're hungry, they're shelterless, and they're being chased around by the cops during the sweep. Then they go to a new location and they're met by cops saying, keep moving. Where are they, where are they supposed to go? So let's try to keep that in mind. I've been trying to get the subcommittee for sheltering and year-round sheltering and winter sheltering going. Those in the group of the ones that I've spoken with on the phone are the only ones that have responded, other than Hans. We got an automatic reply from him, and then he did say that he would like to talk about it later. I don't want to talk about it later. Now is the time. I'm hoping everyone can do that, please. As per Ann Deacon's assertion that winter shelter was not needed last winter, I beg to differ. Again, these same demographics, the same data and demographics that we're talking about should be dealt with. I mean, we need real numbers before we can make a statement like that. We don't have those numbers. We don't have the data that Ann was asking for, has been asking for months. And clearly Hans has a big chunk of that. And I just want that. Like, where are we right now? Where were we then? Like that, you know, I mean, so how do we move forward? That's the question. But to make no recommendation of tiny homes at this time, I'd like to remind us all that we're still in an emergency pandemic declared by county and city and state and CDC and Deacon recommended back last year that they stay with CDC recommendations. BPD Flo Simon also said that they would stay with those recommendations, and just none of that's really happened. So I just want to know for our houseless neighbors who are out there right now, who are getting swept, unable to go into base camp, getting bounced out, and then getting chased by the cops wherever they go. They don't have water, they don't have food, and the city has officially, you just remember, the city has asked our citizenry to not donate to these people, but instead donate to many organizations who aren't helping these people. We must do better with our oversight. This is our watch. This is what we're for. So again, I'm trying to push the subcommittee to go. That's a huge thing. I'm glad to see the HSW has rejoined this crucial discussion. I can't believe that nobody seconded it when I recommended it last time. And I'm asking all of you to take a deep breath with me and lift with me. I've got a new nonprofit going with my friends and who are we've got a great thing going. And we've made a great
Marcus, we have other people with that want to
I just
speak.
want to say also, so that you know, that Rick Sepler has spoken for Seth Fleetwood in saying that during this pandemic, Seth is not interested in having a negotiation with our group about the sheltering that Sepler and Seth asked for months. I just want to be clear, and I want it on the record. Thank you for your time, all.
Michael Lillquist.
Sure. So I think I'd like to add a recommendation on there. I'm just going to put a pin in it for now. I think that we, the entire system, should make it a point to develop the human capital, to develop the partners we keep saying we need, to develop the people with the expertise that we keep saying we need enough of to run these programs. I'd like that to be somewhere in there. But what I'm going to do instead is make a more formal motion. I hereby move that the Homeless Strategies Workgroup formally recommend to the Whatcom County Council that we adopt the 3 long-term recommendations as proposed, specifically to establish interim housing units for families with children, to establish shelter and services for people who are medically fragile, and to support the relocation of base camp to a permanent home. I'm hoping for a second.
Brown second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, can I just speak to it? I'm just picking up the long-term ones, not because I don't think the short-term ones are unimportant, but I think the short-term ones are already constant with existing policy, whereas the other ones, they're kind of a step out. And I want to make it clear that this work group, I want to ask if this work group agrees with those recommendations.
Other discussion on the motion? Marcus?
I beg your pardon. Yeah, no, I'm a little confused on that. I guess I would, one, maybe ask for the possibility of you to repeat that for me. And secondly, is there any way we could break that down into different motions? It seems like it's multi-layered to me. Bifurcate, as they say.
I'd rather not. They are basically reading the 3 recommendations in the staff document, just the short, bold-faced title of them.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote on this. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. You got that, Kathy? Those opposed? Anyone abstaining?
As Michael said, I guess I'd rather not.
Okay, so Marcus is abstaining, I take it, and Dave Krass is abstaining. Okay, the motion passes. Michael Barris, you had your hand up earlier.
most of my question was really nicely answered by Tara and Anne. I just want a very short vignette. And it goes to Michael Lilliquist's statement about the grass sidewalks. I spent a good chunk 2 nights ago with a parent of someone that, Hans, you will know quite well, because he's not successful at base camp. And this dad was telling me about an hour and 15 minutes, no matter what the city does or what Mission does or the county does, no matter what wonderful grass paths are built and set aside, this young person will respond hostilely and negatively. And you'd think that this is a father who would be angry about that. And that wasn't the case. You guys all know this story, but no matter what we all do, there will be times when we cannot come up with what works. Even the second recommendation in Michael Lilliquist's tripart thing, there are just going to be people whose meth addiction makes it impossible, and the pain is always going to be there. So we got to keep doing the best we can do and get our hearts broken a little bit. But I'm telling you this from this dad who didn't know what else to say to you.
Did you want to respond to that, Ann? Then I'm going to go to Riley.
I just wanted to give some hope because, Michael, that's a story we hear and it's a heartbreaking story. I want people to know that we have a program called GRACE, the Ground Level Response and Coordinated Engagement Program, that has actually worked with some of those people and actually brought them to stability and housing. It takes a village to really support those people, and it's one person at a time. I think I was just trying to bring some hope to this group that actually we've been told just this week by our jail chief that she thought there was no way we would ever stabilize this one person that was a frequent flyer. And in fact, the person has housing, is stable, on meds, not using drugs. It does happen. I just feel sometimes we need good stories because there are so many sad ones out there.
Riley.
I just want to make sure as we're working through these recommendations that we aren't neglecting our small cities as part of this process. While they're not appropriate for a full-blown shelter, we need to make sure that the providers that are out there are being looped in so that we can connect people with the resources they need. I was thinking specifically of the Ferndale Community Resource Center or the Family Community Services out at the Linden School District. These are some vital life links that keep people from ending up at base camp. And so whatever we can do to reduce the total amount of people falling into that situation saves us a lot of money down the line. So the immediate recommendations and the long-term recommendations are all great. I just wanted to make sure that we're thinking about how we can kind of prevent the pipeline from getting too crowded.
Yes, Hans, and then Commissioner Shepard.
Oh, the moment passed. I'm fine.
Okay, Commissioner Shepard.
Yeah, my question was on the short term. The second line is establishing an overflow winter shelter when base camp is full. Is that in addition to the existing one on Holly Street that we have? Because that's been operating in that capacity right now, to my knowledge.
That is the one on Holly Street that is used during the winter months. And the recommendation here is to extend the time frame that it is open.
Okay, so using that same facility, but increasing the time scope.
Correct.
Okay.
That's the November through March that you were talking about, right, Ann?
Yes.
Okay. And my second question was, we often get this request for the sheltering needs of a population that's very challenging for government supported sheltering. And I'm wondering if we need in that short-term list the encouragement of a private group to provide that option that is challenging for us to, whether it's called a wet shelter or a extreme low barrier shelter. Those are the services that are very hard for government to locate on government property or to support with government resources, but it's something we continue to hear about as this unmet need. And that I just wondered what that role for a private group to be able to stand that type of operation up, and if that's something we want to recommend.
Go ahead, Ann.
I'm a little challenged with that. I obviously agree that that's where private entities need to step up when the risk to government and its taxpayers that we are unable to do that. But I'm not sure, our role here in the Homeless Strategies Workgroup is to give recommendations to county council, and I'm not sure how the county council would act on that. That's all I'm saying, just from a technical standpoint. Obviously, it's a great idea, but I don't know how to make it happen.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thanks.
So we're about out of time and we need to have some public comment, but I do want to make sure that we speak a little bit about the subcommittees, because we always run out of time and never seem to be able to address that. I think what I would like to know is, for the chairs of the committees, could you just briefly describe kind of what your plan is, your meeting schedule, and if you don't have that today, maybe that's fine. You could email it in and we can deal with that later. But go ahead, Emily.
I guess, Barry, I have a question first, which is, so thank you, Ann and Tara, for this presentation and for the summary of recommendations. I'm just wondering if we can spend a little bit of time thinking about the role of the Homeless Strategies Workgroup as it relates to this. Because as a chair of a committee, I'm not exactly sure what to convene, what is the agenda that I'm convening a group on? And I don't want to pull people together without clarity. So I'm not sure what's the role of the Homeless Strategies Workgroup going forward? And how does it relate to these recommendations? And what's the ask of subcommittees?
Well, I think from my perspective, today's session was to provide us some clarity on some action items and some things for us to target. I think maybe it's up to those folks on those subcommittees maybe to take a look at that and come up and formulate what you think. I think the overall mission of the group is to try to move these ideas forward to the county council, and the county council then can work on funding and programming and such. So we're really kind of just getting into this next step, which is this list that we have. So I'm just open to ideas and what we think the right process is.
Barry, I have a follow-up question to that, which is, like, if we make these recommendations to county council, it feels like it might be helpful for county council to then accept or not accept the recommendations and then come back to this group and say, we've agreed to these things that you recommended, and here's how you can be helpful to us as a legislative body in advancing these things forward. That would feel really useful for me, as opposed to trying to make it up on our own and hope it's useful to them or not, but to get some direction from the body that has convened us about these recommendations.
Yeah, that was going to be the second part. I totally agree that we need to have the county council look at this list, come up with a determination, and come back with some guidance and direction for this group. Michael, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I've been trying to get myself out of being the chair of the subcommittees by finishing the work. And what I mean by that is I'm now chairing two of them. One is funding, one is year-round shelter. I think we might have just done most of the year-round shelter subcommittee work with the current recommendation. I just stepped into chairing that because no one was there, and we decided not to meet until after this meeting. I'm going to send around an email and say, hey, do we feel like our work is done or not? So we have not yet formally met. We may decide that the subcommittee's work is done. We may decide there's some unfinished business. With regard to funding, the largest part of that discussion had to do with House Bill 1590, the sales tax increment, which the county council and the city of Bellingham just adopted. So again, most of the business is done. I'm going to try to reconvene that and talk about some other possibilities that are still out there. For example, a dip into REIT funding the county could do that the city of Bellingham has done, and to tie our recommendations to larger efforts that have to do with family health that has the housing component. So I'm really hoping that I'll be able to disband both of those subcommittees, but I need to check with the committee members to make sure what is left undone that maybe belongs in those subcommittees.
Okay, thanks, Michael. One other piece of business that we need to take care of today is to set our regular meeting schedule. And I am open to suggestions of what folks think they want to do going forward, starting now. Any suggestions? Marcus?
I would suggest we go weekly, considering the emergency that we're in right now, and it is a pandemic emergency. However, if I can't get anybody else to reason with that, I certainly hope that we will stick to the normal schedule of every other week. I also would like to say one other thing right now. I move to reassess the available data in regards to the unsheltered and those unable to take advantage of current services, with intent to identify whether nonprofit partners should be considered for partnership during this pandemic.
Do we have a second to that motion?
Could you please repeat that again?
I move to reassess the available data in regards to the unsheltered and those unable to take advantage of current services, with intent to identify whether nonprofit partners should be considered for partnership during this pandemic.
What form would that reassessment take? Would that be another agenda item at our next meeting?
It seems we need to get these numbers together, and it seems we've identified there's some numbers that need to be got.
I'd like to continue discussing where we think the unmet needs are. I think that's where you're going, Marcus.
Well, I'd like to reassess those numbers. Like I said, it seems that we have missing data.
I didn't hear numbers from Ann though on unmet. I don't know. I think there's some unanswered questions. I don't know if reassess is, yeah.
That is my point.
If I can just clarify, one of the short-term recommendations is to do that data work. And I guess the other thing I would say, Barry, just in terms of your question, in terms of frequency of meeting, there's a lot of work to be done that a large committee isn't going to be effective in doing. And I think, it would be much easier, at least for city and county staff, to get these recommendations either approved by the councils or not, give us some direction on what we need to do, and then fill in the blanks as we go, and to come back and report to this committee on some kind of regular basis. Weekly, there's simply nothing that's just an hour and a half of work we don't get done every week. And this committee is an oversight advisory committee, but it's not necessarily the workhorse committee. This is the one that kind of directs the work that they want to be done. So I want us to just be really thoughtful in terms of how we best use this committee and how we also best use this time of staff, because staff aren't going to be able to just jump at every request. We are very thoughtful in how we move forward, and there is data to be gathered, but I don't believe that, I'll speak only for myself, I would not recommend to county council that we put at the top of our list an alternative shelter for people who aren't able to use current shelters. We are developing specialty shelters all the time. We are looking at those issues, but for people who just, I don't know, I could go on forever. I'll stop now, Barry. I just think we need to be really thoughtful about people's time and what is accomplishable.
So is there a second to that motion? Let's get that figured out first.
I would like to second part of Marcus's motion, which is the bit about looking at the data for people who are currently unserved. Under the short-term recommendation, it indicates the focus will be initially on night-by-night shelters, which means the methodology specifically doesn't look where people, when they're not in shelters. And I think part of our data gathering has to be looking outside, looking for people who are walking on the grass, not on the sidewalk. So that was the first part, I think, of Marcus's motion. And then the second part had to do with meeting that need. I don't know if I'd go that far just yet.
Councilmember Brown?
Yeah, I speak against the motion. I agree with Ms. Deacon. We, like any organization in any scenario, we have limited resources, and we need to focus on the areas that we've identified will have the greatest impact first for the greatest number of people and work our way down the list.
And Beck?
Yeah, excuse me if I missed it, but I know we made the recommendation for council for the long-term recommendations that were on there, but we didn't do necessarily the short-term ones. And those short-term ones include some of that data piece in there. So I'm wondering if maybe we could do the motion to recommend those short-term recommendations to council as well. Or am I jumping over the motion, or will that include part of what Marcus is?
Well, yeah, we're kind of jumping over the motion, but Marcus could reconfigure his motion to be more in line with what Michael said and what you have just said.
I could make a stab at it. I could try to say, I move to reassess the available data in regards to the needs of the unsheltered and those unable to take advantage of current services as they pertain to the rights of the citizens. And that's something that we're seeing right now. And if we don't deal with the sweeps, guys, that's a huge part of what we're not dealing with that we should. It's if they're hinging the sweeps on these numbers. The city's asking for these numbers. I had a meeting with Rick Sepler 3 weeks ago, and he asked for specific numbers that I can't give him, but we can. There's those among us who can.
I'm going to understand Marcus's motion be to endorse staff short-term recommendation number 4, but in addition to include in that assessment of the people who are unable and are not using currently available shelters. Is that a way of restating your motion, Marcus?
I think that's a fair compromise. We'll put it that way.
I'm trying to help you out, buddy.
I'll put it to you too, that like my organization is registering people and we're also asking them why they can't take advantage. Other people have been doing that independently through the camps that keep getting swept, and people don't want to give that information while they're packing their bags. This has been really difficult, but I ask you all to please recognize our citizens are in distress. And so this is the emergent need in Whatcom.
If Marcus is willing to restate his motion as endorsing staff recommendation number 4, but with the addition of reassessing the data on people who are not currently in shelters and are not currently being served as part of that data methodology, I would second the motion.
Well, then I'm going to go ahead and move with that as stated for now. So if you would like to restate that and make that motion, I will withdraw my motion, Michael.
Do you want me to make that as my motion?
Sure.
I would endorse, I would move that we recommend, do what I said, please. Somebody go back and read the tape.
I withdraw my motion if Michael will do that.
Hold it. Kathy, do you have that? What Michael's suggestion was?
Michael Lilliquist made a motion to recommend the short-term recommendation number 4 to council, which is establish a data collection process to assist in ongoing analysis and planning, but to add a reassessment of available data regarding unsheltered and those unable to take advantage of current services. Does that summarize it?
Okay, do we have a second to Michael's motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Mr. Schroeder.
Oh yeah, thanks, Tyler here. I just had a question or maybe a request to Councilmember Lilliquist to amend the motion just slightly to actually just recommend the short-term goals in total with the amendment for number 4.
What say you, Michael?
If not, I'll just bring that motion.
Muted, buddy.
If not, I can just bring that motion forward after you vote on this one. Either way.
That'd be fine with me, Tyler.
Okay, we'll do it that way. Any other discussion on Michael's motion?
Could you repeat that again once more, Tyler? I'm sorry.
Tyler's not, Tyler's thing isn't being considered. We're going to do that next.
Okay.
So it's just Michael's motion on item number 4. Hannah?
So I guess my concern is just about, duplicating efforts. So what I appreciate the need for the data that Marcus is speaking to, but I'm a little hesitant about, I believe the point in time count right? I mean, that gathering of information and the questionnaires and everything associated with that is yet to come forward in a report. And so personally, I'd like to see that report come forward first. And I believe that in number 4, it already speaks to, I mean, sort of the needs and, you know, trends and needs, and I would see that to fall in there. So I'm just, again, with the limited amount of resources and time, I don't want us to duplicate efforts that are already in progress.
Okay, let's wrap this up and vote on this motion. Marcus, do you have anything just specifically on the motion?
Yeah, no, I just to be clear, I think that I tend to agree with what Hannah was just saying about it. I think that it's just also important that we really try to include information that can be had by the HOT team with a good questionnaire now, and they're paid to do that. And also with information that we've identified that Hans does have, and it's on the cell phones of the employees right now. Right now is what we need to talk about. Right now is when the people are being displaced. Thank you for your consideration, everyone.
Okay, are we ready to vote? Terry? Your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually would be supportive of getting data in addition to what we've collected in this year's point in time count because of the COVID conditions that enabled everyone to shorten their surveys. It won't be as in-depth as it has been in previous years, even though we did conduct an unsheltered count, which was actually optional for us to do. But I think there would be benefit from asking more questions and maybe convening that data subcommittee to decide what those questions should be.
Okay, are we ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Two. So that motion passes. I would like to move. No, go ahead, Tyler. You go next.
Oh, yeah. So just real quickly, I would move the rest of the short-term goals and recommendations to the county council.
I'll second that. Discussion on that. There's a weird little hand next to you, Marcus. Is that, I've never seen that one before.
It's not me. No, I'm out.
My cursor turned into a hand for some reason. That's weird. Okay. See no discussion. All those in favor of recommending the short-term goals, raise your hand. $16 in affirmative, those opposed. That passes unanimously. And I would like to move as far as the meeting schedule. I think what I am hearing is the sweet spot is once a month for staff. So I move that we have a once a month homeless strategies work group, and we will, well, I'll stop there for now.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Barry,
Emily, go ahead.
yeah, I just want to say, I think making recommendations is what we're supposed to do, and that's great. And you asked about the subcommittee work. So as a chair, I just want to say I'm happy to pull meetings together at the request of council or health department staff to help move these recommendations forward or gather more information. But I'm not going to pull together subcommittees without a request for an action item. So we will stand ready to assist with these recommendations as we can be useful.
That sounds very
And so that could be in addition to the meeting once a month as a large group. If you need us as a subcommittee, please reach out to me and I'm happy to rally us together in support of action.
Marcus?
Oh, hi. Yeah. Okay. So on the committees, on the 4th of this month, I put out an email to all the members of the subcommittee on sheltering and year-round sheltering and emergency and winter sheltering. subcommittee. I offered to chair that, and I didn't get any responses for a while. I called Michael. We agreed that we should maybe try to do something. He put out an email. Hans later responded. I did talk to Mike Hilly about it. He's also in the subcommittee, but we've not heard from anybody else in the subcommittee. Now I'm hearing Michael talk about that he thinks that's covered right now, and I definitely don't. So I'm hoping that subcommittee will try to move forward. I know that Hans wanted to wait until after this meeting to move forward with it, while I thought it was more emergent. Now I'm insistent that we go forward with it. That was the whole reason the HSW existed, was exactly that. That was the main focus of the HSW when I joined. Is why I joined. Sheltering year round and winter shelter. That's the HSW's mission. If we've diverged from that, you should at least include the subcommittee and give it real credence.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of once a month meetings, raise your hand. (13) in affirmative. Those opposed?
Emergency.
Two opposed. So that passes. We are on a monthly schedule. Lisa? Can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. I just noticed that Jason had his hand up earlier and for the subcommittees, and he didn't get to speak because we have been meeting, and I was just wondering if Jason had something he wanted to report on.
Okay, I apologize. I did not see you, Jason. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Please go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. I was actually just going to raise, we actually have been meeting, like Lisa just mentioned, and one of our biggest initiatives that we've been discussing has been establishing a year-round young adult shelter for the age ranges of 18 to 25. And so, yeah, we can put that into email form just with some updates, but just wanted to say that we have been meeting and that's our priority right now. Also wanted to add in that at some point I would love to see this group discuss more about these sweeps happening, because it's ridiculous that we haven't addressed that yet. So I'll leave it right there.
Okay. With that, I think we need to get over to public comment, because I have to get my wife to a COVID-19 vaccine appointment that I cannot miss. So anyway, let's go with a 20-minute period for public comment. Please call the first speaker.
The first speaker will be Banush Sharbani, followed by Doug Gustafson. Go ahead, please, Banush. State your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for your time. I am specifically concerned about all the sweeps, as Jason and Marcus have mentioned. It was mentioned earlier about, individuals being harmed. I don't know how else it could be described, how harmful it is for these sweeps to be done every few weeks. These people are living outside with so little, especially when they're not in an encampment like they used to be at Jerry Field and prior to that by the City Hall, when all of us were helping them by providing food and clothing and all sorts of other things. And they've lost that sense of community, they don't have anything. And every few weeks, they're given a warning a couple of days before or a week before. And then what happens is they get swept, they lose more, they're re-traumatized, and then they're told, go to base camp. Well, I don't know in what language we need to speak for everyone to understand that base camp is not the answer for everyone. It works for certain people, but it doesn't work for everyone. And it's been mentioned here in these sessions before. People have mental illness. They have drug and alcohol problems. They have been traumatized in their lives, in different ways. And Base camp does not work for them. So please don't keep bringing this up every time you meet, that there are so many beds available. So that is not the answer. This committee or this work group needs to focus on finding multiple solutions to address this population. As far as I know, there's supposed to be probably over 1,000 homeless people in this city or in this county, probably. And Bellingham should not be the sole city to address this. It needs to be a county-wide effort. And I mean, the other thing is the HOT team. When was the last time the HOT team went out there? When was the last time the HOT team took care of these people to help meet some of their needs? I don't see them. I myself have gone into these camps. I myself have spoken one-on-one with these people. I don't feel terrified. I'm a small stature woman. I don't feel terrified by these people. They're kind, they're
Thank you so much. Your time is up. Our next speaker is Doug Gustafson, and then we'll go to Kelly. If anyone else would like to speak, please raise your hand virtually by clicking the hand icon on your screen, or if you're joining by phone, you can dial *9. Go ahead, Doug. Please state your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hey, this is Doug, chairman of Homes Now, Not Later, Doug Gustafson. I heard a little bit from this meeting, and I heard about long-term and short-term solutions. I would like to say that both are needed. You're always going to have stuff that pops up like next week and you couldn't expect it, and then you're always going to have stuff that you're planning for 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So instead of choosing one or the other, that's what it seems like from this meeting. Let's emphasize one or the other. Let's choose one or the other. But in fact, you need to do all of it at once. And so there's always going to be, like, let's say you solve the problem that you're trying to solve. Then after you've solved it, a new problem will pop up, and you're going to need something to pop up in a short period of time in order to, like, fix it or whatever for the interim. So Homes Now operates the two first tiny home villages in Bellingham, Unity Village and Swift Haven, for people who are homeless. We house currently around 50 people. It's just under 50 people. I would classify it more as emergency housing rather than emergency shelter. I know that there's HUD definitions of what qualifies as shelter and what qualifies as housing. And I know that, like, they might have said that we barely qualify as even just like barely a shelter. But in fact, when you have your own individual unit, and you have electricity and heat and internet and insulation, and you have places to cook your food and do your laundry and have like the basics of what you would have in real housing, you have your own unit, but it costs almost nothing. Like it's very inexpensive. And so, especially with us, where we have our resident managed approach, where the people who live there are the people who run it. So like there's people in any tiny home community that can act in a staff capacity and are fully competent and just as competent as people who are paid. And also a historical note on Swift Haven. 20 of the people that live in Swift Haven were previously camping on that lawn at City Hall. That was, I would say it was a dysfunctional camp for sure. And it wasn't like, I don't support that camp. I'm saying that we were able to get people into a different housing situation in which people were able to stabilize, and we're seeing people get jobs, getting vehicles, moving forward, and some have found housing already. And so we're ready to do more. Like Homes Now is ready to set up a third site. I've talked with the port recently, and I hope that there might be some avenues in which Homes Now could get the Cornwall site, and we can house more people and get more people back on their feet. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
The next speaker is Kelly. Go ahead, please. Kelly, state your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Kelly Bachman.
I live in Bellingham. I appreciate the work you're doing and the thoroughness of it. Well, what's on my mind is the sweeps. For two reasons. One is what I can see moving around the city, the people in the doorways and people in the woods on my hiking trail, and also what previous speakers have described, the sort of tragic circumstances of these people that are, falling through the cracks. I was pleased to see on your identified shelter needs and gaps, number 8 was local governments may not be able to provide every type of shelter desired, which I totally get. And then it goes on to say, need to identify humane responses to people living unsheltered. So that's what I like that, humane responses. Yes. What can we do? If government can't do that, then who can, But then when we got to recommendations, I didn't see anything about that. Like I thought there might be a recommendation to, strengthen relationships with nonprofits who can, minister to these people that are otherwise falling through the sort of government cracks. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
If anyone else would like to speak, please raise your hand virtually by clicking the hand icon on your screen or dialing *9 by phone. The next speaker is Lucy Morse, then we'll go to Vaughn EO and then Des.
Kathy, we're losing you. I can hardly hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yes.
We'll go to Lucy Morse. Please state your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Lucy Morse and I live outside, outside the city of Ferndale in the county. And I was really interested in the information in family homes. And I that in the past, and this is something I don't know right now, but in the past, the family community coordinators at the county schools have worked with families to keep them stable, to help them be stable financially and emotionally, and to work with children who are in jeopardy and or in need. And I don't know about the current state. I know in the school district, almost family communicators at the I think that it might behoove this committee to look at how the schools can be involved in working with families so that they stay housed. That's all.
The next speaker is listed as Vaughn EO. Go ahead, please state your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
How's my audio? Is it coming in clear?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Okay. My name is Vaughn Ochoa. I was in the homelessness quicksand for 5.5 years. I was in a collision. A car collided with me when I was on a scooter, got me a brain injury, and I went tumbling into the homelessness quicksand right after that. The Opportunity Council supported me for 2.5 years. I went through the Housing and Essential Needs Program. I also went through BHAR, which I can't even remember what that stands for now. I had 4 case managers who I know had huge caseloads, and they still did the best they could to help me out. So big thank you to Opportunity Council. I understand that there's just a huge need, and we're needing to scale up with services. So 5.5 years, in the homelessness quicksand. And then I had my second court case for SSI. That entire time, I was trying to come up with all the paperwork necessary to get support. And I encourage everybody who's homeless right now, or in a tent, or wherever in an encampment that you know is going to get swept, please just start the paperwork process now. 1 week before my 6th anniversary of my brain injury, I got it finally accepted for disability, and I got my first disability check 2 weeks before everything shut down for COVID. I don't know, but I want to encourage people to just start the paperwork. I messaged BOP Mutual Aid. I asked them, how many people in your encampment are on waiting lists for services? And I got no response. So what's up? I don't know what's up with that. When we talk about the needles, the sweeps, and we want to stop the sweeps, yeah, but there's all of this, where there's so much hazardous material around, right? And even if the needles are for insulin, if the needles are for hormone replacement therapy, if the needles are for Botox injections for chronic pain, the needles need to not be strewn all over the place. They might even just be syringes that you can get from the cannabis shop that are full of extract, but they need to not be strewn around. And I want to know how we can help with keeping things as sanitary as possible around these areas. And maybe that will reduce the number of sweeps. Maybe it's just a thought. I learned I'm taking classes right now to get my real estate license, and my goal is to get that license and do what I can to help house people. And I learned something the other day, that the moment that there's illegal activity within 4 walls and a roof, if there's illegal activity, you lose all of your protections. So I look at that as one of the reasons why we cannot just offer tiny huts to people who are engaging in illegal activity or at risk of perpetuating illegal activity in an area.
Thank you, Vaughn. Your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
The next speaker is listed as
We're losing you
Des.
again, Kathy.
The next speaker is listed as Des, and then we'll go to Anonymous.
And those two will be our final speakers for this public session. So.
Go ahead, Des. Please state your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. So my name is Desiree Spiriguata. Thanks for meeting again. I don't know. I'm glad you guys are meeting, but I do have a couple disappointments. I guess my first disappointment is my fault, and I just want to share it with you guys. I had a lot of expectations from this team. I thought the hiatus would would create some sort of like breakthrough or epiphany for y'all. But it seems like it was just a time for you to dig your heels in deeper without giving us any say. My second disappointment is just, it seems like your goal is still to just fill 80 beds at a base camp. If you were to fill those beds, with healthy individuals, the ones that you want, you still wouldn't solve any problem. There's hundreds of people. And I know that because in your hiatus, I've decided to take to the streets. I've been out there, I've been watching fellow advocates, we've been feeding folks, we've been meeting with folks, hearing their stories, trying to get some data, trying to get them help. And it's not hard. It's not hard to just park next to a group of tents, get out of your car and say, who's hungry? I passed out about 280 food items the other day in one day. It's not hard. And so these sweeps really have to stop. These sweeps are what really create instability. They create fear. And I also wanted to mention one thing that I've been observing is that, at least in my experience, is that city employees are not concerned for the health of these folks when I don't see any hot teams out there with me. And actually, the city tried to boot me from the park the other day, claiming I needed a permit to donate my lunch to homeless individuals. So I don't understand what this hiatus was for when we come back on and it's the same group of folks leading it with the same group of stagnant ideas. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Marcus, for bringing up the sweeps. Those are really important. They're traumatizing. They're really sad to watch. They're really sad just in general. So yeah, I'm just kind of disappointed again. 80 beds doesn't fix the problem. We'll fill them for you if you want, but yeah, you're still gonna have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homeless people. So let's get down to the bottom of this, you know? I believe in you for all it's worth. Okay, I thank you for your time and I yield the rest of mine.
The next speaker is listed as anonymous. Go ahead, state your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Sonia Pisker. Actually, it's not anonymous. I wanted to just speak on, I wanted to just reiterate some of the last 2 comments there. I definitely feel a sense of disappointment hearing that you will continue to meet at a really limited schedule. We volunteers here in town, you know, we're out there every day doing this stuff. I understand you're not paid to be on this committee. It is part of some of your regular job duties that you are paid for. However, just hearing that after the hiatus that you have taken a schedule that resembles the hiatus, shorter by maybe 2 weeks, is super, super disappointing. I mean, I can't even describe the feeling. It feels like being left helpless in the city, like completely helpless. And we're adults, you know, but that's the feeling that you're giving people. These sweeps have to stop. We cannot help people when they're being traumatized over and over again. I understand that many of you have probably never had to move in a traumatic situation. Maybe you have. For me personally, it really strikes at a nerve because I'm a refugee. I'm a 2-time refugee. I've had to resettle in 2 countries by force, under the gun, or expulsion. So I understand what these people are feeling and what that can trigger in you, the psychological reaction. And you're making everybody's lives harder by letting this continue and not recommending that it be stopped. It's affecting neighbors, it's affecting the homeless community, it's affecting volunteers, and it's affecting relations between everybody, including providers, volunteers, and homeless people, and the police. And I don't think you want that to be happening, and you need to be aware of that happening. I mean, this is the 7th sweep in a year during a COVID emergency. The city has never seen such force or brutalization, and it shouldn't continue. And you have everything you need to recommend it to stop, and you should. It's frustrating to be working, to be putting this time in, and having you with control over some things, not making better recommendations. I just don't understand. We were out feeding people yesterday, and the hot team walked right by us, mumbling under their breath. They didn't stop to chat with us or the homeless people we were talking to. And that's just some of the stuff we deal with on a daily basis. And that's super important for you guys to know.
Thank you, Sonia. Your time is up.
Yeah, thank you.
So Kathy, go ahead and call that one last speaker. We'll allow one more.
Okay, the next speaker is listed as HK Mobile. Go ahead, please state your full name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Heather Katahdin. Thanks for taking the time to listen to your citizens share and for the work you each do. It's a hard day for me to give public comment. I'm outside. One of the things I wanted to share is how I notice that there is digital inequity in our community since our library's been closed for a year, and many of the people that I meet that are unsheltered do not have access to the same devices and Wi-Fi and knowledge that this past year our public has been doing during the pandemic. They're not able to go in the library and use computers. So I think that that should be considered, and there should be something offered, whether it's like a mobile van to help with that. And the other thing I have noticed, and I would like to have an individual conversation sometime with Councilperson Stone, and also there's somebody else on the county council that are on the board of the Opportunity Council. And I've noticed that Maple Alley Inn Soup Kitchen that our taxes pay for, I have not been able to locate when or where it is open. And I was the first coordinator over a couple decades ago, and we worked hard to keep that soup kitchen open. And I see a huge gap in that there's no soup kitchen available to people who are experiencing mental illness as a disease and homelessness that is outdoors. Not everybody can access base camp. It's a special procedure to go in there. Where Maple Alley Inn Soup Kitchen was open to all. There was always room at the inn. So I want us to encourage a change in that. I want to encourage Opportunity Council or funding for another group to be able to step up and do that. So I look forward to being able to talk one-on-one. I apologize if my sharing isn't as clear as before. And I really appreciate the many, many citizens that are stepping up and talking to people that are unsheltered and treating them like family. And as family, we can share our food. So again, thank you so much for each of your individual work and working together on this strategy group. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks to all who spoke today. We really appreciate your comments. Thanks, Emily. You have something? I got to get out of here, so go ahead.
I thanks, Barry. I just I want to say thank you as well to those who spoke, and I think this group, as hard as it may be, needs to be responsive and like have that conversation about the sweeps. And that might mean we need some information, honestly, from the city. I know this is a county team, but I guess I'm suggesting that maybe we set the next meeting to really talk about the sweeps, to look at what's actually happening, get a full report from different city entities. And then, as hard as it is, take a stand and make a recommendation. I know that none of us want to see this happen again next year. None of us do. So let's figure out what it is that we can do better so that we don't perpetuate this issue. And that doesn't need to derail us from the good work and recommendations that happen. But I think we just got to step into the hot seat for a bit thoroughly, which means we need information so that we can say something about it. So I just want to be responsive to that. And I know there's a lot of complexities in here with organizations and elected officials and all sorts of things, but let's take a minute and do that work.
Okay, Marcus, one quick thing, and then we're going to adjourn.
Thank you, Emily. And I just want to comment here, if only a comment, and if I could take all of our time, I would move that we recommend a moratorium on sweeps in Whatcom County if we could. But if we can't, then I guess if I can't do that now, Barry, then I won't. But if I could, I would for my friends out in the street. For real. So shall I make that move?
You can make any motion anytime you want, Marcus.
Sorry, let's be quick. Let's do it, guys. If we put a temporary moratorium on all encampment cleanups, unless it's like a high danger or something, because this is madness. I make this motion. Yay or nay, please.
I'll say yay. I'll second it or whatever.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion on this motion. Michael.
I don't think Officer Prass is here right now who might be able to best describe the city's operational policy. As I understand it, we don't sweep. We leave, I'll make up a number, 80, 90% of camps alone, and that we prioritize those where we have evidence of hazardous conditions or complaints of troublesome behavior. I don't know if we do everything as we're supposed to do, as we say we do, if we meet our goals. But the fact is, recently we've had a further entanglement, which is we've had large, visible, unauthorized camps, some of which had a protest component, some of which did not. And there was enforcement action taken by the administration against those. That's kind of outside the policy that handles those hundreds of camps I'm talking about. So we have actually an entanglement of recent political events and then a long-standing, I mean, we've had very large homeless camps in Bellingham for years that have remained and often been problematic and troublesome and places of victimization and harm. I think it's a very complicated issue. I'm unwilling to vote on the motion as proposed.
Thank you. Michael Barris.
Without the discussion that Emily's proposed, I'm going to vote to abstain. Not pro or con, but I'm not prepared to render a decision. And I know that we all feel very, very intensely about this issue. That's where I am.
I'm going to move to hold this motion until such time we have more information.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to hold. Discussion on the motion to hold.
Never heard of that.
Oh, when is that until such time?
We would have to, we'd have to check in with the folks that would be providing that information to find out what, when that could be available.
Okay, because I think that's important, and I don't want sweeps either. I think there's some nuance to that, and I would be supportive of a slightly more nuanced recommendation of that, Marcus, just for the record, because I do think there's some complexities that we need to address. So I would love more information, and if that means as quickly as we can do that. So I'll volunteer my time, Barry, if there's something I can do to support pulling a meeting together, and Tara, if there's something I can. Anyway, if there's something I can do to help get us a timely, thorough discussion so that we can make a full recommendation, I'm happy to volunteer my time.
Thanks.
I'm President Sweeps, guys. So if you want to witness, it's real. I don't testify lies.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion to hold? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand. That's 10 affirmatives. Those opposed? 3. So that passes. We will get some information on when we might be able to get that report to this committee. With that, no other business before us. We are adjourned.
Thanks, Barry. Sorry.